Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Real Life of Animals. Tonight, we are taking you deep into places most people will never see, and some who did never came back the same. What you are about to hear are not fictional stories. These are real-life incidents drawn from documented reports, witness testimonies, wildlife investigations, and survival accounts from people who were there when things went wrong. The names have been changed to protect those involved, but the events themselves remain exactly as they happened. These stories come from remote forests, riverbanks, and jungle paths where humans crossed into territories ruled by instinct, silence, and powerful animals that do not hunt for cruelty, only survival. And yet the outcomes are often tragic, sudden, and deeply unsettling. As the night settles in, remember this: the wilderness does not announce danger, it waits. If you're here for real animal encounters, true survival stories, and the kind of reality that stays with you long after the video ends, you're in the right place. Let's begin. Story 1. The Kinabatangan Jungle Incident. The Kinabatangan rainforest in eastern Sabah, Borneo is not a place designed for mistakes. It is dense, wet, alive, and relentlessly quiet in a way that feels unnatural once the sun goes down. The jungle there does not announce danger. It waits. In 2014, a small group of local gold prospectors had been camping near a narrow tributary of the Kinabatangan River. These were not tourists. They were men who had grown up around the jungle, men who knew how to read broken branches, how to avoid crocodile paths, how to listen when the forest went silent. That was what unsettled them most about the third night. The forest stopped making noise. No insects, no birds, no movement, just the sound of water slowly pushing against mud. One of the men referred to here as Rahman had wandered roughly 30 meters from camp to wash his hands in the river. He was gone for less than 5 minutes. When the others heard him scream, it was not loud. It was short, cut off mid-breath. They ran. What they found at the riverbank did not look real at first. Rahman's torch lay half-submerged, still on. His sandals were several meters apart, one caught in roots, the other floating. The water itself was disturbed in a slow, circular motion, as if something massive had just slipped beneath the surface. They searched for hours, calling his name, hacking at brush, refusing to accept what their instincts already knew. At dawn, they found the python. It was a reticulated python stretched motionless across a fallen tree not far from the camp. Its midsection was grotesquely swollen. One of the men noticed something that made his stomach drop: a scrap of fabric caught between two scales, the same color as Rahman's shirt. Local wildlife authorities were called. When the python was sedated and cut open, Rahman's body was found inside. His arms were pinned against his chest, his legs folded unnaturally. The autopsy later confirmed he had died from suffocation before being swallowed whole. What made the incident particularly disturbing was the location. The riverbank where Rahman had been taken showed no signs of struggle, no drag marks, no blood. The python had struck from shallow water, constricted him in seconds, and pulled him under without leaving evidence. Experienced trackers later stated that the snake must have been watching the camp for hours, waiting for a single moment of isolation. Villagers nearby reported something else. For weeks before the attack, livestock had been disappearing: goats, chickens, even a calf. Tracks were found near homes, but no one imagined a python large enough to target an adult man. The jungle had been warning them. They simply hadn't understood the scale of the threat. After the incident, the area was temporarily closed, but locals say the forest never truly forgets blood. Even today, fishermen along the Kinabatangan avoid that tributary at night. Some claim that when the river is calm, you can still see slow ripples forming where nothing should be moving at all. Story 2. The Loiser Highlands Disappearance. The Loiser rainforest in northern Sumatra is one of the last places on Earth where the jungle still controls every rule of survival. It stretches endlessly across steep hills, flooded valleys, and thick canopies that block sunlight even at noon. The locals say that once you step too far inside, the forest begins to decide how long you are allowed to stay. In 2017, a small group of seasonal workers entered the Loiser Highlands to clear old footpaths used by rubber collectors decades earlier. Among them was a man referred to here as Hassan, a quiet father of two who had worked forest routes for most of his life. He knew the signs of danger, or so he believed. The group built a temporary camp near a muddy ravine where fresh water flowed between massive tree roots. The area showed signs of animal activity, but nothing unusual for Loiser. Wild boar tracks, deer droppings, broken branches high above eye level, which they assumed were caused by falling limbs during storms. The first warning came on the second night. Hassan complained that something had brushed against his leg while he slept. He thought it was a monitor lizard or a wild pig. No one laughed, but no one panicked either. The jungle often touched you when you were not paying attention. On the third morning, Hassan did not wake up. His hammock was empty. His boots were still beneath it. His machete leaned against a tree exactly where he had left it. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken vegetation, no blood. Just a long, smooth indentation in the mud leading away from camp and disappearing into dense undergrowth. Search teams were organized within hours. Local trackers noticed something unsettling almost immediately. The trail did not zigzag like a human drag mark. It moved in a straight, deliberate line, weaving around obstacles rather than crashing through them. That trail belonged to a large python. After nearly 6 hours of searching, they found it coiled at the base of a massive fig tree, barely visible beneath layers of leaf litter. The snake did not flee. It did not react aggressively. It simply remained still, as if conserving energy. When wildlife officers arrived, they confirmed it was a mature, reticulated python measuring over 7 meters. Its body showed a pronounced bulge near the center. The decision was made to euthanize it. Inside, they found Hassan. Investigators later reconstructed what likely happened. Hassan had gone to relieve himself just before dawn, walking a short distance from camp. The python, likely attracted by repeated human presence and food waste, had positioned itself along a natural corridor. The strike would have been nearly silent. Constriction would have lasted less than 2 minutes. What disturbed the search team most was not the attack itself, but the lack of resistance. There were no defensive wounds on the snake. Hassan never had time to fight. After the incident, local elders shared stories they had avoided telling outsiders. They spoke of guardians of certain valleys, massive snakes that learned patterns, watched camps, and returned year after year. They warned that once a python successfully takes a human, it may begin to see people as prey rather than threats. The camp was abandoned immediately. Months later, rubber collectors reported seeing a large snake moving through the same ravine again, slimmer this time, but following familiar paths. Authorities were never able to confirm whether it was the same python. In the Loiser Highlands, the forest rarely gives second chances. It simply waits for the next mistake. Story 3. The river that didn't let go. Deep within the Loiser rainforest, there is a section of jungle locals avoid even during daylight. A slow, tea-colored river cuts through dense vegetation, its banks thick with tangled roots and overhanging branches. The water looks calm, almost lifeless, but elders say the river watches, and when it decides to take something, it does not give it back. In late 2014, a group of independent gold prospectors moved into this region after hearing rumors of untouched deposits upstream. The group consisted of 5 men, all experienced in jungle travel. They knew the risks: malaria, flash floods, wild animals, but they believed preparation could overcome anything. They were wrong. One man, referred to here as Daniel, was responsible for collecting water each morning. The river was the only reliable source nearby. On the 6th day of their expedition, Daniel went alone, carrying 2 large containers and a flashlight, despite it being well past sunrise. The forest canopy was so dense that the riverbank remained in shadow. The others heard nothing unusual. No scream, no splash, no call for help. When Daniel did not return after an hour, they assumed he had slipped or encountered a minor problem. 2 men followed the path down to the river. What they found stopped them cold. One of the water containers lay crushed near the bank, its plastic split cleanly down the middle. The muddy ground was disturbed, but not violently. There were no signs of a struggle, no dragged footprints, just a wide, smooth trail leading directly into the water and then vanishing beneath the surface. The river was still. Local guides were brought in by radio that afternoon. When they saw the scene, they refused to enter the water. They explained that large reticulated pythons in this region often hunt from the water itself, anchoring their bodies beneath submerged roots while leaving only their heads exposed. From above, they look like driftwood. Search efforts continued for 2 days. On the 3rd morning, one of the guides noticed something unnatural along the opposite bank. A long section of reeds pressed flat, forming a faint curve that followed the shoreline. They found the python coiled beneath a fallen tree, half submerged, its body unusually thick along its midsection. The snake did not flee when approached. Instead, it slowly tightened its coils, a defensive response indicating stress and recent feeding. Wildlife authorities were called. When the python was restrained and examined, the reality became undeniable. Daniel's remains were inside. According to forensic analysis, the attack had been fast. Daniel likely knelt near the water's edge. The python struck from below, clamping onto his torso and pulling him into the river. The constriction would have occurred underwater, preventing any sound from escaping. Death would have followed within minutes. What made the incident especially disturbing was what investigators discovered next. The snake had returned to the exact same hunting position at least twice afterward. Local fishermen later reported seeing a massive python's head surface near the same bank weeks after the incident, unmoving, watching the shore. One fisherman claimed the snake followed his canoe for nearly 20 meters before slipping back beneath the water. Experts believe the python had learned a new behavior, associating humans with food sources along that river path. This is rare but not unheard of in isolated regions where snakes grow exceptionally large and human encounters become predictable. The prospecting camp was dismantled immediately. Authorities marked the river zone as restricted, though enforcement in such remote terrain is limited. Even today, locals avoid that stretch of water. They say the river learned something that day, and once it learns, it remembers. Story 4. The Village That Went Silent. The rainforest surrounding Gunung Palung National Park has always been hostile to outsiders, but for the small villages scattered along its edges, it was simply home. Generations had lived there without electricity, without roads, surviving by farming, fishing, and trading with passing loggers. The forest was respected, feared, but understood, at least until the year everything changed. In early 2011, a cluster of disappearances began in a riverside settlement that does not appear on most maps. Fewer than 80 people lived there, most of them related by blood or marriage. The village had no official name, only a local one which has been withheld. What matters is not where it was, but what happened. The first incident involved a teenage boy sent to check fishing traps along a narrow tributary. When he failed to return by nightfall, his family assumed he had stayed with relatives upstream. By morning, concern turned to fear. A search party found his sandals near the water's edge, neatly placed, untouched. There were no drag marks, no blood, no broken branches, just still water and silence. 2 weeks later, a woman collecting firewood vanished in the same area. Then a farmer, then a child. The village elders began to suspect something unnatural. Some believed a spirit had been angered. Others whispered about a creature that moved without sound, that watched from beneath the waterline. But no one spoke openly. Fear has a way of keeping people quiet. It wasn't until a logging crew passed through the region that the truth began to surface. One of the loggers reported seeing an enormous reticulated python crossing a clearing at dawn. He described its body as thicker than a man's chest, and long enough that its tail had not yet left the forest when its head reached the riverbank. The snake moved slowly, deliberately, without urgency, as if it had no reason to fear anything. That same week, livestock began disappearing. Goats were taken from their pens overnight, their enclosures left intact. Chickens vanished without feathers or disturbance. The pattern was unmistakable. A joint effort was organized between villagers and regional wildlife officers. They followed the river upstream, marking disturbed soil, bent vegetation, and subtle trails pressed flat through the undergrowth. The signs were faint but consistent, repeating every few hundred meters like checkpoints. On the 4th day, they found the nesting site. Beneath a collapsed fig tree in a hollow shaded from above lay multiple python sheds, dozens of them. Some were years old, others were fresh. The sheer size of the shed skins indicated not one snake, but possibly several large adults sharing overlapping territory. That night, while the team camped nearby, something approached. At approximately 2:30 a.m., guards posted along the perimeter reported hearing a low, rhythmic movement through the leaves. Not footsteps, not wind, something heavy sliding. Lanterns were raised, but the forest swallowed the light. Then one of the men screamed. A python had struck from the darkness, seizing him by the leg and pulling him toward the brush. Others rushed forward, hacking with machetes, beating the snake with poles. After nearly a minute of struggle, the python released and retreated, leaving behind deep puncture wounds and crushed bone. The man survived, but what he described afterward changed everything. He said the snake did not coil immediately. It pulled him slowly, methodically, as if trying to relocate him to water. This was not a defensive strike, it was a practiced behavior. The following day, authorities made a grim decision. The village would be evacuated. Over the next week, residents were relocated to a larger settlement downstream. Houses were abandoned, fields were left untended. The forest reclaimed the land almost immediately. Within months, the paths vanished, swallowed by vegetation. Several large pythons were later captured in the region, but officials believe at least one massive individual was never found. Years later, satellite imagery shows faint clearings where the village once stood, now barely visible beneath the canopy. Hunters still avoid the area. Fishermen refuse to anchor there. Even logging companies mark it as a no-stop zone. Locals say the forest claimed the village because it stayed too long, learned too much about human routines, human weaknesses. And once the rainforest learns, it does not forget. Story 5. The mine that fed the forest. Deep within the lowland rainforest of East Kalimantan, there is an abandoned mining corridor that locals refer to only as the Old Cut. It was never officially sealed, never fully reclaimed, and over time it became something far more dangerous than the operation that carved it into the earth. The mine was originally opened in the late 1990s by a small private company extracting coal and mineral deposits from shallow seams near the river. For several years, crews of migrant workers lived in temporary camps along the jungle edge. Food scraps, livestock waste, and constant human activity reshaped the ecosystem around them. Rodent populations exploded. Wild pigs followed, and where prey gathered, predators adapted. Among them were reticulated pythons, already native to the region but now thriving at unnatural densities. When the mine shut down abruptly after a collapse killed 2 workers, the company pulled out within weeks. Machinery was removed, fuel tanks emptied, camps abandoned. What remained was a network of tunnels, drainage channels, and warm concrete structures slowly being reclaimed by the forest. For several years, nothing was reported. Then people began disappearing. The first was a prospector traveling alone, hoping to scavenge leftover equipment or ore. He was last seen entering the mine corridor at dawn. His motorcycle was found parked neatly along the trail. His helmet rested on the seat. There were no signs of struggle. Search teams found drag marks near one of the flooded access trenches, wide, shallow impressions pressed into the mud and leading into the tree line. The trail vanished at the river. 2 months later, a pair of illegal miners set up camp near the same area. Only one returned. He told authorities that during the night he woke to the sound of movement outside the tent. Slow, deliberate circling. At first he assumed it was a pig or deer. Then the ground shifted beneath him. The tent collapsed inward. He said he felt the fabric tighten around his body as something massive pressed against it, crushing the air from his lungs. His partner screamed once, cut off mid-sound. By the time the survivor cut his way free and fled into the forest, the camp was silent. At sunrise, nothing remained but flattened vegetation and a trail leading downhill toward the flooded shafts. Authorities sealed the mine entrances with fencing and warning signs, but enforcement in the region was minimal. People continued to pass through, and the pythons continued to learn. Wildlife officers later confirmed that the abandoned mine had become an ideal thermal refuge. Concrete absorbed heat during the day. Tunnels stayed dry during monsoon season. Prey animals congregated near the water runoff. For a large ambush predator, it was a perfect system. In 2014, a government survey team entered the area to assess environmental damage. They were experienced professionals equipped with radios and firearms. Even so, they underestimated what lived there. While documenting erosion near a collapsed shaft, one member of the team was seized from behind. The python struck low, targeting the thigh, and immediately wrapped around his torso. The constriction was described as instantaneous and overwhelming. Pressure applied evenly, crushing ribs, stopping circulation before panic could fully register. It took 4 armed men, repeated gunfire, and nearly 10 minutes to free him. He did not survive. When the snake was finally killed and measured, it exceeded 7.5 meters in length. But the most disturbing detail came later during examination. Partially digested remains of more than 1 human were found within its stomach. The conclusion was unavoidable. The python had been feeding on people for years. Following the incident, a controlled operation removed several large snakes from the region, but officials admitted privately that they could not account for all of them. The terrain was too dense, the tunnels too extensive, and the forest too vast. Today, the mine is listed as a restricted zone. Maps mark it, but signs rot quickly in the humidity. Travelers still pass nearby. Locals still hunt along the riverbanks, and occasionally someone fails to return. Those who know the forest say the mine did not simply shelter the pythons, it taught them. It taught them patterns, paths, human habits. The forest fed them, and once that happened, there was no going back. Story 6. The River That Learned to Wait. The rainforest surrounding the Kapuas River Basin in West Kalimantan is not hostile in the way outsiders expect. It is quiet, deceptively calm. The danger there does not rush, chase, or roar. It waits. The Kapuas is the longest river in Indonesia, winding through dense jungle, remote villages, and stretches of land that have never been formally surveyed. Along its banks, small communities survive through fishing, timber collection, and seasonal farming. For generations, people respected the river's wildlife, especially the large snakes, but believed coexistence was possible as long as boundaries were observed. That belief began to collapse in the early 2010s. It started with livestock. Goats vanished from tether points overnight. Chickens disappeared from raised coops without disturbance. Even dogs, alert, territorial animals, were found missing, their chains intact, collars lying in the mud. Villagers blamed crocodiles at first, but crocodiles leave chaos, drag marks, broken ground. What was happening here was precise. The first confirmed human incident involved a fisherman who worked alone along a narrow bend of the river where overhanging roots form natural shelters. He had fished that spot for years. Neighbors said he knew the water better than anyone. One morning, his boat was found drifting downstream. His net was still cast. His sandals rested neatly on the riverbank. There were no signs of struggle. Days later, search teams discovered a disturbed patch of reeds upstream, flattened vegetation leading into deeper jungle. The trail ended abruptly at a shallow pool. No blood, no remains. Wildlife officials quietly noted something troubling. The attack site was positioned where the river narrowed, forcing prey closer to shore. An ambush point. Over the next 2 years, similar incidents followed. A palm oil surveyor disappeared while crossing a flooded access road. A teenage boy collecting firewood never returned home. A timber worker vanished during a midday break less than 50 meters from his crew. Each time, the scene was the same: orderly, clean, almost intentional. It was not until 2017 that authorities finally confirmed what many locals already feared. A series of large, reticulated pythons had altered their hunting behavior, adapting specifically to human movement along the river. One snake, captured after attacking a rescue volunteer, measured over 8 meters. Examination revealed human remains at different stages of digestion, indicating repeated feeding over an extended period. But the most unsettling discovery came from behavioral analysis. The python did not strike indiscriminately. It waited for individuals to be alone. It targeted predictable routines. It used water as cover, positioning itself partially submerged, allowing currents to mask movement and scent. It had learned patience. Survivors of near encounters described the same sensation: a sudden, overwhelming pressure without warning. No hiss, no movement detected beforehand, just instant constriction. One man survived only because his machete struck bone before the coils fully tightened. He later said the snake did not retreat in panic. It withdrew slowly, deliberately, as if assessing risk rather than reacting to pain. Authorities attempted controlled removals along the river, but the effort was largely symbolic. The rainforest canopy limited aerial surveys. Ground patrols covered only a fraction of the territory. And for every snake removed, others remained unseen. Villagers adapted in their own ways. Fishing schedules changed. Children were forbidden from riverbanks alone. Some communities installed raised walkways. Others simply abandoned long-used sections of shoreline. Still, disappearances continued. Less frequent but no less disturbing. Today, the Papua's region is officially marked as high-risk wildlife territory. Warning notices advise against solo travel near water. But enforcement is limited, and necessity often outweighs caution. The river flows as it always has. The forest remains silent. And beneath the surface, where reflections distort reality and movement blends with shadow, something still waits. Having learned that humans, once prey, are predictable creatures. Story 7. The plantation where the jungle closed. In the Bukit Barisan Selatan rainforest, stretching across southern Sumatra, is officially protected land. On paper, it is a sanctuary. In reality, it is fragmented by illegal plantations, forgotten access roads, and abandoned camps swallowed slowly by vegetation. The deeper you move into this forest, the less it feels like nature, and the more it feels like something reclaiming what was briefly taken from it. In 2019, a small, unauthorized palm plantation operated along the forest's outer boundary. The workers were not locals. They were seasonal laborers brought in from other regions, promised fast pay and temporary housing. Most had never lived near true rainforest wildlife before. They were warned about tigers, about floods, about disease. No one warned them about the snakes. The camp consisted of 8 men living in raised wooden huts connected by narrow planks. Beneath the huts, the ground remained dark and wet year-round. Drainage channels led toward a shallow creek that flooded during heavy rain. From the beginning, workers noticed unusual signs. At night, the dogs refused to leave the huts. Chickens vanished without sound. Tools left outside were found displaced by morning, as if something large had passed through the area without disturbing the structures themselves. One worker reported hearing slow movement beneath the floorboards, too heavy to be rodents, too quiet to be pigs. Management dismissed the concerns. The first human disappearance occurred during a rainstorm. A man referred to as Rafi volunteered to clear a blocked drainage channel near the creek after sunset. He took a headlamp and a machete. The channel was less than 40 meters from the huts. When the rain intensified, visibility dropped to almost nothing. Rafi never returned. At first, others assumed he had slipped and taken shelter. When daylight came and there was no sign of him, a search began. They found his headlamp still on, half submerged in mud near the creek. The machete lay nearby, clean, untouched. There were no footprints leading away, only a wide, compressed path in the grass leading directly into the water. The creek was shallow, barely waist deep. Search teams expanded outward. Nothing. 3 days later, a foul odor drifted through the plantation. Workers followed it into a section of jungle that had been recently cleared. There, coiled among cut palm trunks, was a massive reticulated python, motionless, its body grotesquely distended. It took wildlife officials hours to sedate and secure the snake. Rafi's remains were recovered, but what followed was far worse. Instead of retreating deeper into the forest after the incident, snakes began appearing closer to the huts. Workers reported seeing thick bodies stretched beneath walkways partially concealed by shadow. One man woke to find a python's head resting against the wall of his sleeping quarters, tongue flicking slowly through the gaps in the boards. No attack occurred that night. It was as if the snake was waiting. Management ordered increased lighting and night patrols. But artificial light attracted insects, which attracted rodents, and rodents attracted predators. The forest adjusted. 2 months later, another worker disappeared. This time, the attack happened inside the camp perimeter. The victim was last seen washing clothes near a water barrel shortly before dawn. Others heard a single sharp sound, wood cracking, but assumed it was falling debris. By the time anyone checked, only the overturned barrel remained. The snake responsible was never found. Wildlife experts later explained that large pythons in fragmented forests often lose fear of human structures. They learn the rhythms of camps, the timing of shifts, the locations where humans pause, kneel, or crouch, positions that expose the torso. The plantation was abandoned shortly after, but locals say the damage was already done. Hunters passing near the former campsite have reported unusually aggressive snakes, larger than typical for the region. One claimed a python struck at his boat from the water's edge without provocation. Another described a snake following him for several minutes through undergrowth before disappearing silently. The jungle around the plantation has fully reclaimed the structures now. Roofs collapsed, walkways rotted away. The creek flows differently, redirected by fallen trees. Yet people still avoid the area. They say the forest learned something during those months, that the snakes there no longer hunt by instinct alone, but by observation. And once something in the jungle learns how humans move, where they pause, and how easily they disappear, it does not forget. Story 8. The village that stopped using the path. In the lowland rainforests of Papua New Guinea's Sepik River region, villages are connected not by roads but by narrow jungle paths carved through generations of use. These paths are lifelines. They lead to water sources, hunting grounds, neighboring communities, and emergency access points. When a path is abandoned, it is never without reason. In 2021, one such path simply stopped being used. The trail connected a small riverside village to a nearby sago harvesting area less than 2 kilometers away. For decades, villagers, men, women, and children walked it daily without incident. The jungle there was dense but familiar. Wildlife sightings were common but rarely dangerous. That changed quietly. It began with pigs. Domesticated pigs started vanishing from their pens overnight. Fences were found intact, no blood, no noise reported. At first, villagers blamed theft, but when tracks were examined, elders noticed something wrong. The impressions in the mud were not hooves. They were long, smooth, and heavy, dragging marks that curved in unnatural arcs. Shortly after, dogs refused to walk the path. Even when called, they froze at the trail entrance, whining, tails low, eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the trees. The first human disappearance involved a woman collecting sago palms at midday. She was experienced, cautious, and never traveled without notifying others. When she did not return by evening, a search began immediately. Her basket was found beside the path, undisturbed. Her sandals lay neatly next to it. There were no signs of panic, no broken branches, no scattered belongings. The ground showed only one disturbance, a wide, flattened section of undergrowth leading away from the trail and into thicker forest. Searchers followed it for nearly 50 meters before the trail vanished completely, as if the forest had closed behind whatever passed through. Days later, heavy rains washed away most remaining evidence. Then it happened again. A teenage boy disappeared while checking fishing traps near the same path. This time, witnesses heard something, a deep rhythmic sound described as breathing through wet leaves. By the time anyone reached the area, the sound was gone. Fear spread quickly. Villagers began traveling only in groups. Children were forbidden from the forest entirely. Elders performed traditional warnings, placing markers along the path meant to signal danger. None of it helped. The third incident was the breaking point. A hunter, armed and alert, walked the path at dawn. He never returned. Later that day, his brother found a section of trail where the ground appeared compressed, as if something incredibly heavy had rested there for an extended time. Wildlife officers were finally brought in. What they discovered confirmed local fears. A massive reticulated python, estimated to be over 9 meters long, had established a hunting territory along the path. But this was not a wandering snake. It was stationary, territorial, strategic. Experts noted something deeply unsettling. The snake had positioned itself at a natural choke point where the trail narrowed between tree roots and a shallow embankment. Anyone passing through would be forced to slow down, adjust footing, and expose their body. Perfect conditions for ambush. Camera traps were installed. Footage later recovered showed the python lying completely still for hours at a time. Body partially buried under leaves, head aligned with the path. When animals passed, it did not react. When humans appeared, it shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly. It was selecting. The snake was eventually located and removed after an extended operation. During examination, remains from multiple victims were found at different stages of digestion, confirming repeated successful attacks over months. Yet even after its removal, the path was never used again. Villagers say the forest feels different there now, quieter, heavier, as if something unseen still occupies the space. Hunters report hearing movement along the abandoned trail at night. Slow, deliberate sounds that stop the moment someone listens too closely. Wildlife experts caution that when a large predator learns to associate a specific human route with food, that behavior can spread. Younger snakes may inherit the territory, others may mimic the pattern. The jungle does not reset itself easily. Today the path is nearly gone, overgrown, swallowed by vines and fallen branches, but no one clears it. No one walks it, not even in emergencies. Because some routes are abandoned not out of fear, but out of understanding. The forest watched, the forest learned, and once it learns, it waits.